The first time I understood that my grief did not belong to me, I was 23 years old, and I was on my knees on the kitchen floor, and there was a small wooden cradle in my arms that my husband had carried out of our bedroom before the sun came up. He had not spoken to me when he carried it out. He had not spoken to me when he set it down beside the wood stove. He had not spoken to me at all. In fact, for 4 days by then, and I understood, in the way Amish women always understand things, quietly, sideways, without anyone ever saying the words out loud, that the cradle was not being taken away because the baby was gone. The cradle was being taken away because I was still crying about it. Outside the kitchen window, the snow had started again around 4 in the morning, and it was the kind of snow that falls without any wind at all, straight down, patient, the way snow falls in Holmes County when it means to stay a long time. I remember thinking, with a clarity I did not have words for yet, that the snow was allowed to fall for as long as it needed to. The snow was allowed to be what it was. And I was not. That was the morning I began to understand what had been done to me. Not what had happened to me, what had been done to me. There is a difference, and it took me almost 3 years and one small English therapist with a pair of reading glasses she kept losing to teach me the difference. But I am getting ahead of the story. Let me start again. My name is Martha. This is the Amish Stories, the channel where I tell you the stories the community would never allow me to tell while I was still inside it. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio, in a district so quiet that the loudest sound most days was the buggy wheels on the gravel lane and the wind coming through the corn. I was married at 19 to a man named Jonas, and I left at 26, and the story I am telling you today happened in the middle of those 7 years. In the winter, I was 23, and it is the story of what my community did to me when I lost a child at 4.5 months and made the mistake of believing that my sorrow was my own. If you have ever been told that your grief was a sin, if anyone has ever tried to make you feel ashamed of the weight of your own losses, write it in the comments. I want to know. Tell me where you are watching from tonight, and tell me if you knew before this video that in some Amish communities a woman is not permitted to mourn a lost pregnancy out loud, or for long, or with any visible sign of it at all. I read every single one of your comments. Every one. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if these stories mean something to you, because there is so much more I have not yet said. Now let me tell you the shape of the world I lived in so you understand what came next. In the outside world, grief has a name. Grief has therapists and support groups and specialists in a thing called perinatal loss and books written for it, and hospitals that will hand you a small blanket and photographs and a memory box and permission, the greatest gift of all, permission to cry for as long as your body needs to cry. In my community, grief did not have any of those things. In my community, grief had a doctrine. The doctrine was called Gelassenheit, which means yielding. It means surrender. It means the soft laying down of your own will in favor of God's will. And it is beautiful, actually, when I try to describe it to English people who have never lived inside it. It is one of the most beautiful ideas the Amish ever built. It is also, when it is bent even slightly out of shape, one of the most dangerous. Because Gelassenheit teaches that everything that happens to you is God's will, and that resisting what happens to you, grieving too loudly, questioning too much, weeping past the acceptable window, is a form of Hakmet. Pride. The cardinal sin. For men, pride looks like ambition. For women, pride looks like sorrow that lasts too long. You will not find this written down anywhere. It does not have an official name in the Ordnung, that unwritten code that lives in the air of every Amish community, never on paper, never spoken aloud, but known by every single person who lives inside it. It exists the way many things in Amish life exist. Everyone knows. No one says. And the women who learn it fastest are the ones who survive the longest without being called in front of the bishop. I did not learn it fast enough. That is what this story is about. I met Jonas at a church singing in the fall I turned 18. He was 2 years older than me, dark-haired, quiet, the kind of man whose silence you could mistake for depth when you were young enough not to know the difference. He came from a farm 2 districts over, near a creek that used to freeze so hard in January that the boys would drive the sleighs across it. He was not cruel. I want to say that now, at the beginning, before I tell you what he did, because it matters. Jonas was not a monster. He was a man raised inside the same silence I was raised inside, taught the same doctrines by the same bishops, and he did what he was taught to do. The framework was the mistake, not him. We were married on a Thursday in early November, the year I turned 19. There were nearly 300 guests. 4 hours of preaching in the morning. Roast chicken and creamed celery and mashed potatoes and 7 kinds of pie on long wooden tables in his father's barn. The way it had always been done. The way it will be done for 100 more years after I am gone. I wore the blue dress my mother and I had sewn together in the kitchen, my hands shaking so badly on the last night of stitching that she took the needle from me and finished the hem herself without a word, the way Amish women deliver blessings, with their hands still moving. I was pregnant within 4 months. My daughter, Anna, was born the following autumn. And then there was a stillness of about 18 months, which was long enough that my mother-in-law began mentioning it at Sunday dinner with the small, needling comments that Amish women use the way English women use pointed looks. Some women rest too long. Some women forget what they're for. I got pregnant again, the March I was 23. I want to tell you what those first months felt like because I need you to understand what was later taken from me. There is a particular joy that comes with a second pregnancy in an Amish home, a joy that has nothing to do with modern celebration. There are no announcements, no photographs, no gender reveals, no gifts. What there is instead is a quiet knowing that begins to spread through the community without anyone saying anything at all. My mother would bring extra bread on Tuesdays without explaining why. My sister-in-law began saving a certain kind of soft cotton for a small blanket she never mentioned. Jonas, who did not touch me often outside of what was expected, laid his hand on my stomach one evening in April while I was washing the supper dishes and said only "good." That one word. And I understood. We had begun to prepare, in the quiet way Amish families prepare, when I began to bleed in the middle of the night in early August. I was 4.5 months along. I will not describe what happened in that bedroom. I do not describe those things on this channel, and I will not begin now. What I will tell you is that by the time the sky began to lighten over the fields, I knew. I did not need anyone to tell me. My body had told me first, and my body kept telling me for hours afterward, and Jonas came in from the barn at some point in the early morning and stood in the bedroom doorway and did not come any closer than that, and I watched his face and I saw him understand, and I saw him decide something in the moment of understanding. Not consciously. I do not think he knew what he was deciding, but something in his face closed like a door being latched from the other side. He said, "I will get Mother." And he left. His mother came. My mother came. An older woman from the district. I did not know her well, a midwife of sorts named Rebecca, came and stayed for the day. They were kind to me in the practical way Amish women are kind. They made me tea, they changed the sheets, they took away what needed to be taken away, they touched my hair once, and did not say anything about it. No one wept. No one said the word baby. No one said the word loss. The word most used, spoken quietly among themselves as though I could not hear it from where I lay, was past. It has passed. As though what had happened inside my body was a season, or a weather system, or an inconvenience that had moved on. By evening they were gone, and Jonas came to bed, and he did not touch me, and he said, "We will speak of it in the morning." We did not speak of it in the morning. We did not speak of it at all. For the first 3 days, I did what Amish women are supposed to do. I got up. I made breakfast. I washed the clothes. I tended to Anna, who was almost 3 by then, and did not understand why her mother's hands shook when she poured the milk. I moved through the house the way I had been taught to move through everything difficult in life, with my hands busy and my mouth closed and my prayers unspoken and my back straight. I did not cry in front of Jonas. I did not cry in front of Anna. I saved my crying for the moments when I was alone in the pantry, or bent over the washtub in the yard, or hanging laundry with my back to the house, so the row of Jonas's shirts hid my face from the kitchen window. But on the 4th day, something broke. I was shelling peas at the kitchen table in the middle of the afternoon. Anna was napping. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock in the front room and the horses shifting in the barn and the small dry rattle of the peas hitting the bowl, and I looked up, and through the doorway I could see into our bedroom, and the small wooden cradle was still there. Jonas's grandfather had built it. It had held Anna. It had been placed by our bedside in early July because I had asked for it early because I had wanted to look at it because looking at it had made the baby feel real to me in a way nothing else did. And I looked at the cradle, and something in my chest folded in on itself, and I put my head down on the table beside the bowl of peas, and I sobbed. I sobbed the way I had not allowed myself to sob in 4 days. I sobbed loud enough that Anna woke up. I sobbed loud enough that I did not hear Jonas come in from the field. He stood in the doorway for a long time before I noticed him. When I looked up, his face was not angry. That is the part one needs you to understand. His face was not angry. It was something worse than angry. It was concerned.
He was concerned about me.
Concerned in the way a farmer is concerned about a horse that has begun refusing the harness. Concerned that something had gone wrong inside me, something that would need to be corrected before it grew larger. He said very quietly, "Martha, it has been 4 days." That was all. He turned around, and he went back out to the field, and I understood, sitting there at the kitchen table with the bowl of peas in front of me, that my grief had entered its final permitted hour. That whatever remained of it now was mine to carry silently, or not at all. The next morning, before the sun was up, I heard him in the bedroom. I heard the small scraping sound of the cradle being lifted from the floor. I heard his footsteps going down the stairs, into the front room, past the kitchen. I did not get up. I did not follow him. I lay in the dark bed, and I listened to my husband remove the last visible sign that the baby had ever existed, and I did not say a word. If you are still with me, thank you. I know these stories are not easy to sit inside. If you want to keep going with me on this channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. There is so much more of this life I have not yet told you about, and I need you here for it. 2 days later, the bishop's wife came. Her name was Sarah, and she was a woman in her late 50s then, tall, thin-boned, with pale gray eyes that had a way of looking through you rather than at you. She arrived on a Wednesday morning without any notice, driving her own buggy, which was unusual. Bishops' wives usually rode with someone. She tied the horse to the post by the garden gate and came up the path with a covered dish in her hands, which she set on my kitchen table without asking. Corn pudding. Still warm. She had made it that morning. She sat down at my table without being invited to sit, and she took off her bonnet and set it beside the dish, and she folded her hands in front of her, and she looked at me for a long moment before she said anything at all. Then she said, "Martha, I have come because I love you." I want to explain to you what that sentence does to an Amish woman. In our community, the phrase "I have come because I love you" is not tenderness. It is a warning. It is the softest and most terrible opening a woman can hear from another woman in that culture. It is the sentence that comes before the correction. It is the door being opened into a room you did not know you were about to enter. I did not answer her. I did not know what to say. I sat down across from her, and I folded my own hands in my lap, and I waited. She began by asking about Anna. She asked about my mother. She asked about the garden. She asked about the tomatoes I had put up in July. She spent nearly 20 minutes on nothing at all, the way Amish women warm up a hard conversation the way you warm up a cold stove, slowly, carefully, adding one stick at a time. And then, without any change in her voice, she said, "I have been told you are still weeping." I did not answer. She said, "Jonas is worried." I did not answer. She said, "Martha, I lost one at the end." I looked up.
She did not look at me.
She was looking at the corn pudding on the table, and her hands were folded very still in front of her, and she was not looking at me at all. She said, "I lost one at the end. Almost 8 months.
A boy.
Nearly 40 years ago now. I did not know his face. I did not name him. I buried him in the small plot behind the meeting house without a marker because we do not mark them, and I went home that afternoon, and I made supper for my husband, because that is what a wife does. And I want you to hear me when I tell you this next thing, Martha."
She looked up then.
Her gray eyes found mine. She said, "I did not weep. Not once.
Not that day.
Not the day after. Not for the 40 years since. Because to weep past what God has permitted is to say that you know better than He does what you needed. And no woman knows that. No woman is meant to know that. Do you understand me?" I understood her. I understood her the way you understand ice when it cracks under your foot in a place you thought was solid. I understood her, and I understood, in the same moment, that she was not warning me.
She was pleading with me.
She was showing me the shape of what she had swallowed for 40 years, so I would swallow mine faster, so I would not have to carry it the way she had carried hers.
She thought she was saving me.
She said, "The doctrine is a kindness, Martha. It is a mercy. It saves us from a grief we cannot survive. Do not fight it. Yield to it." And she reached across the table and she covered my hand with hers, and her hand was very cold, and her skin was very thin, and I could feel the bones in it. And I understood in that moment that I was looking at a woman who had been hollowed out from the inside almost half a century ago and had spent every day since teaching younger women how to hollow themselves out in the same way, so that none of them would have to be alone in it. She stayed for another half hour. She talked about the harvest. She talked about the new preacher's wife. She ate a small piece of the corn pudding she had brought. She put her bonnet back on and she gathered her things and she walked to the door, and just before she stepped outside she stopped and she turned to me and she said one more sentence. She said, "The cradle is a hard thing to look at, I know. Jonas did the right thing. Try to be grateful." And then she was gone. I did not cry after that. Not in front of Jonas. Not in front of Anna. Not in front of anyone.
Not for a long time.
But I did not stop grieving either. What I did was worse. I took the grief and I folded it into small pieces, and I hid the small pieces in the places where the community could not see them. I hid pieces of it inside the seams of my sewing basket. I hid pieces of it in the pantry behind the jars of pickled beets. I hid pieces of it in the barn in a small tin box under a loose board where I had begun, without exactly deciding to, saving the small coins Jonas gave me for the market. I hid pieces of it in the dark of our bedroom, in the space between falling asleep and dreaming, where I would sometimes let one tear go, one, only one, into the pillow, silently, so that Jonas beside me could not hear. The women of the community began to warm back up to me within about 2 weeks. This is how you know in an Amish community that you are doing it correctly. The warmth returns. My mother-in-law began to sit closer to me at Sunday services. My sister-in-law brought a jar of honey without any small comment attached. The bishop's wife, when she saw me at the next quilting frolic, laid her cold, thin hand briefly on my shoulder and did not say anything, and I understood that I had been forgiven for the 4 days of open weeping, that I had corrected myself in time, that I was being welcomed back into the warmth of the community, and the warmth felt exactly like love. It felt exactly like love. That is the part one have to keep telling you. It felt exactly like love. But something inside me was building, in the tin box under the loose board in the barn, and in the seam of the sewing basket, and in the small dark corner of the bedroom where I let one tear go each night, and I did not know what it was building toward, and it would take me 3 more years to find out. I want to tell you about the morning I understood I was going to leave. Not the morning I left, the morning I understood I was going to. There is a difference. It happened almost 3 years after the winter I have been describing. It was another winter. Snow again. The same kind of straight-down patient snowfall. Anna was almost 6 by then. I had had one more pregnancy, another daughter, Ruth, who was almost 2. I was standing at the kitchen window before dawn, and I was watching the snow come down over the garden, and I was thinking, for no reason I could name, about the small wooden cradle. About the morning Jonas had carried it out of the bedroom, without speaking to me. About the corn pudding on the kitchen table. About the bishop's wife's cold hand on mine. About 40 years of a woman not weeping. And I thought very simply, very quietly, without any drama at all, I do not want Ruth to learn what I learned. That was all. That was the whole decision. It arrived the way you know a season has changed. Not by looking at a calendar. By feeling the cold come in a certain way through the window. I left about 10 months later. I will not tell that story today because it belongs to a different video. What I will tell you is that I walked out of that house with one canvas bag, and inside the bag was a change of clothes and Ruth's small blanket and Anna's favorite wooden animal, and the tin box from under the loose board in the barn with 3 years of egg money and market coins in it. Enough for 2 nights at a motel, and a bus ticket to a town where a Mennonite woman I had met once, briefly, at a produce stand had said, in the sideways way women say important things to each other, if you ever need. I called her from the phone shanty at the end of the lane. She picked up on the second ring. She said, "I have been wondering when you would call." I do not want to talk long about the shunning that came after because I have talked about it in other videos and because it is not the point of this one. But I will tell you the shape of it. My mother wrote me one letter that came back to me because I had refused to sign the confession. My father, when I saw him across the street in town nearly 2 years later, looked through me as though I were made of glass. My sisters crossed to the other side of the road. The phone shanty at the end of the lane rang once in the third month after I left. I know it did, because a former Amish friend of mine who lived nearby heard it, but by then I had no way to answer it, and I do not know to this day who was on the other end, and I have made my peace with not knowing. What I want to tell you about instead is the therapist, because she is where this story finally becomes a story I could understand. Her name was Karen. She was English, small, in her early 60s, and her office was in a converted house on the edge of a small town about 40 minutes from where I had settled. She had plants on every windowsill. She kept losing her reading glasses inside her own hair. She was direct, but she was patient, and she was the first person in my entire life who did not try to correct me while I was crying. I told her the story of the cradle in our fourth session. I told her about the 4 days, about Jonas standing in the doorway, about the peas on the kitchen table, about the bishop's wife's cold hand. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she took off her reading glasses and set them on the small table beside her chair, and she said, "Martha, what was done to you has a name." I said, "What name?" She said, "It is called coercive control. And what your community did with the cradle, with the bishop's wife, with the doctrine, is called using theology as a tool for enforced emotional compliance. Grief, in a healthy system, is not a moral failure. Grief is a form of love that has nowhere left to go. What your community taught you was that the love itself was the sin." I did not answer her. I could not. She said, "There is more, Martha. Do you want the rest of it?" I nodded. She said, "The most effective systems of control are the ones that feel exactly like love. They give you warmth in exchange for silence. They give you belonging in exchange for the smallness of yourself. And a community that cannot hold your grief does not actually trust its own God. A God who cannot survive a mother weeping for a child she lost is not a God. That is a rule dressed up in a robe." And I sat in her small warm office, with the plants on the windowsill, and I began to cry the way I had not cried in almost 7 years. Not for the baby I had lost, but for the young woman at the kitchen table with the bowl of peas in front of her, who had not been allowed to weep. I cried for her. I cried for the bishop's wife who had swallowed her own grief for 40 years and then poured it, cold, into my hand across a kitchen table. I cried for Jonas, who had carried a cradle out of a bedroom because he had been taught that removing the object was the same as removing the pain. I cried for all of us. I cried for the whole architecture of it. Karen did not say anything while I cried. She did not try to correct me. She let me cry for a long time. I want to be careful here at the end of this story, because I always am. My husband Jonas was not a monster. The bishop's wife who came to my kitchen was not a monster. My mother, who did not come to hold me during any of it, was not a monster. They were people raised inside the same silence I was raised inside, taught the same doctrines by the same men, given the same tools, told the same story about what a woman's grief was allowed to be. The system is the thing, not the people. I do not hate the Amish. The community that harmed me is also the community that taught me to sew, to garden, to bake bread from wheat I had watched grow, to sit with a dying neighbor for 3 days without leaving, to know the names of every star my grandmother had known the names of. I carry all of that with me. I carry it every day. I would not be who I am without it. But I also carry the cradle. I carry the 4 days. I carry the corn pudding on the kitchen table. I carry the bishop's wife's cold, thin hand on mine, and the 40 years of unshed tears inside it. And what I know now that I did not know then is that my grief was never mine to give away. My grief was mine to keep. It was the last honest thing I had. And when they came for it, with the doctrine, with the warm dish, with the soft warning, with the removed cradle, what they were really coming for was the last piece of me that still belonged to me. The piece that could still say this hurt. The piece that could still name what I had lost. The piece that could still someday refuse. If you ever lost something the world would not let you name, I see you. If you were ever told that your sorrow was too loud, too long, too visible, too much that grieving what you loved was a form of pride, or ingratitude, or disobedience to something greater than yourself. I see you. If you ever sat at a kitchen table with someone's cold hand on yours and understood, in the moment of their touching you, that they were not offering comfort but instruction, I see you. If you ever hid pieces of your own grief in the seams of your sewing basket, in the corners of a pantry, in a tin box under a loose board, in the small dark space between falling asleep and dreaming, because there was nowhere in the world you were allowed to put it down, I see you. If you were ever taught that a good woman is a woman who does not weep past the permitted hour, I see you. You were not weak. You were not proud. You were not sinning. You were grieving the way a body grieves when it has loved something it was not allowed to keep. And the framework was the mistake.
Not you.
The framework was always the mistake. Not you. Tell me in the comments what part of this story stayed with you. Tell me if you have ever been forbidden from grieving something the world did not consider real enough to grieve. Tell me your story if you are ready. I read every single one of them. Every one. Please subscribe to the Amish stories. There is so much more I have not yet said, and I need you here for the rest of it. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life. Your grief is a whole language. It always was. And it was never, not once, a sin.